what's the same and what's different, but I think in your opening remarks, I now get to play sort of like a little bit of Denton, a little bit of Parky, a little bit of Oprah, but probably a little bit more like Dr. Phil, and asking some other questions. Now, Jahna and Wayne, this one's for you, and we've got one talking stick, and I can see it's going to be like hot potato, hot potato. One of the things that I learnt actually, largely Jahna, through a presentation that you did on FDIO's behalf when I was at KMAC, was about the concept of cultural governance and how one of the great challenges is how do you merge and mould cultural governance and the obligations that come with that, and corporate governance. So could you just explain to people who aren't familiar with cultural governance, what that means from an Indigenous perspective?
So long before the corporate regulators came along, Aboriginal people had their own form of governance and how we managed our communities. And so for us, cultural governance relates to the way that we behave and interact with one another and within a community itself. So within that comes our cultural protocols, which are instilled on us through language groups, through our skin groups, through our law practices for those that are going through law. It also includes different strategies like the avoidance situation in some language groups in relation to the different skin groups when you're together. So it's around the values, the beliefs, the laws and customs that come with being Indigenous. That's what creates our governance structure. What is different then when you move into corporate structure is how are you supposed to amalgamate our responsibilities in a cultural sense with those under corporate legislation. So I could run a workshop for a couple of hours on how to do that, but I think, yeah, in general, to answer your question on definition, that's the main difference that I can see.
Yeah. Wayne, do you have anything else to add?
Just quickly, you've got to look for where the authority is, and the authority is with the elders. So that's, for me, they hold the stories, they hold your language, they know they are the keepers of the land, they're responsible for transferring knowledge, and that for me is really important. And if you put that and cross it over with corporate governance, I mean, the governance in my business comes from my board, so that's where the authority sits, which is very different because you've got to distinguish between the two. One delivers a different set of obligations to the other. And that's really been a challenge for us on Noongar country, is to ensure that they are seen as separate. It's really important.
Do either Wayne or Jahna, do you have any comment to make about when the corporate and the cultural obligations have clashed? You know, okay, that was a slightly loaded question. Jahna, look like you really wanted to answer that.
I'll quickly say, culture is about family as well. So, classic example is when you have directors representing a corporation, that's what they need to be doing. But sometimes they don't. They represent family interests and self-interest, and that's one of the real challenges that we all deal with on a daily basis. But it's how you manage that, and it's actually how you start implementing new things. And we've started that on our journey. To raise our governance, and that's really important.
I mean, some of the regulations, whether it be the constitutions or the rule books, in some of the Indigenous organisations, it's actually prescribed there has to be a balanced family representation, which, of course, on one hand gives the message that it's family first, yet as Wayne said, the decisions you have to make in that context are actually corporate governance related decisions.
Yeah, and I guess some of our rule books too, now when I speak today with examples, it's not just all in my current employer. I've spent over 15 years on different boards and working in different sectors. So I won't put any names to the examples that I give, but it could be from a variety of different places. Some of the rule books you can see, I believe, actually set our corporations up to fail. You've got boards that are there elected as a representative board, not a skills-based board. And unfortunately, that can turn into a popularity vote. So you've got people sitting on boards that can't read or write and yet are passing financial statements and are unsure of the legal implications and consequences with that. With that, you've got a balance when you've got rarely traditional people on the board, understanding then if there are cultural avoidance situations, how are they supposed to interact, have robust discussions in a boardroom with someone that they're not allowed to speak to or engage with. you've got to also ensure that, again, as Wayne said, that they're acting in the corporate interest, not in self-interest, family interest or traditional owner group interest. And we find that really hard, particularly at Goomela, on the basis that we've got 1,600 members that represent 3 language groups. So while it's hard enough having one language group, we've got 3 separate language groups, all with their own agendas and vision of where they're wanting to sit. And within those language groups, you've got other fractures. So the politics at play is extremely hard to try and balance out. So you've got to show respect to our cultural protocols, but find a way to inform them. They actually, under Western legislation, have a responsibility with their duties of directors, and we can sit through a good week induction outlining their legal responsibilities and the implications so that they are aware.
And that was a kind of a really interesting positioning of some of the work that FDIO it does, which is through the cultural lens or working in a culturally appropriate way to skill up some of the traditional owner directors so they have that understanding and they can marry it appropriately with their cultural understanding. Wayne and Jahna, you've both had to work in, and pardon if this is a clumsy way of putting it, but the family business. You're working for a traditional owner group that you have relatives and very close connections with. What's that like?
Really hard. Trying to balance family expectations where they think you're on call 24 hours a day when they need you, with the perceived conflict of interest from the wider community that are thinking that you're favouring certain groups over others. At the same time, I see a perceived conflict of interest also as a positive, because it means we're over-scrutinised in everything that we do. Therefore, there shouldn't be any space for misappropriation or anything like that. It keeps us accountable and honest. But at the end of the day, I think the best thing about it for me is I'm the first female and first traditional owner, regardless of gender, to hold the position, and that's something that I'm passionate about, is empowering more traditional owners to step into this space. Unfortunately, when you look on it as a global economic scale, it's going to take 170 years to close the gap between men and women sitting at this level. So the more that we can do within our small little traditional owner group hopefully has flow-on effects to other groups.
And culturally, I would imagine too, the role of women and men, there is another layer.
With that is pressure, of course. I'm very blessed that it was my male elders that did ask me to step in and put my hand up for the position, so I have their support and their backing in this. But it is not normal to have a woman speaking for our community group, so yeah, it can be very difficult in other times.
Just on the family obligations, I have to be truthful. I don't get any hassle from my family at all. They appreciate the job I'm doing. They understand what we're doing. They understand it's all about everybody. They understand I can't be everything for everyone. It's just unfortunate the rest of the community doesn't understand that. But that just comes with the turf. But no, I'm really lucky that I don't get any obligations other than you're doing a good job. And that's what I appreciate about that.
Credit to your family.